The bulk of this course has been about the UML diagrams. At the start of each diagram topic, I've tried to explain the purpose of each type of diagram and why you would use it. I'd just like to summarise that in this movie. I'll start by giving some general advice about the use of modelling and diagrams, and then just work through a hypothetical project from start to finish, making some observations about whether and how you might use each type of diagram. First, some general advice on modelling and diagrams. The first point is to model with a purpose. It's all too easy to produce lots of diagrams and model content that add no value. Consider the purpose of each diagram you produce and ask yourself whether it's necessary. In some cases, you may not have any choice. If you work in a heavily regulated environment in central government or an industry where safety is an important factor, you may have a mandated process to follow. In these cases, there will probably be a defined corporate methodology that describes what inputs you need to produce a diagram, what the quality criteria and quality processes are for that diagram, and so on. In situations that are less software engineering oriented, then think through what value a particular diagram gives. I once joined a company where all the developers had been on a UML training course recently. They knew that I knew UML, and a group came to see me. They were working on a project and wanted to produce state machine diagrams, but were finding it difficult. I asked them if the system they were building had any significant state-dependent behaviour. They said no. They were just building a set of database maintenance screens. So I said they shouldn't worry about state machine diagrams. Just because they're there doesn't mean you have to use them. You may have a hammer in your toolbox, but if you're assembling shelves that are joined together with screws, you don't use your hammer. It's also important to think about who's going to use the diagrams you're producing. What do they expect? What level of detail is required? Will they actually use your carefully produced diagrams? Finally, it's not always necessary to model everything. If you're building a system with a number of windows which will all use the same pattern of interaction based on the model view controller pattern, for example, then it may be that all you need to do is model the pattern of interaction between the view class, controller class, and model class or classes. A class diagram for the pattern, or for an example, together with a sequence diagram for that pattern or example, and class diagrams annotated to show which attributes are maintained by which windows may well be enough. So let's think about a possible project. Sometimes you may be given diagrams at the start of a project, where it may be a green field. Starting in the left-hand column here, if you're given diagrams, these may be class diagrams that show the current corporate domain model which your project will extend, or they may be business process models that show the business process that's to be automated, modelled from a business perspective. You should also have something that defines the scope of the project. Moving to the second column, the first step in many projects is to produce use case diagrams. These show the requirements for the system from the user's perspectives. Sometimes, if there's a lot of automated processing in the business processes, it may be appropriate to use activity diagrams to document that processing without going through use cases, which are typically used for interactive scenarios. In earlier chapters, we produced activity diagrams, sequence diagrams, and communication diagrams that we linked to use cases. We did that to show you how they're linked, but it's unlikely that you would do that in a real project. Looking at the third column, you're more likely to produce activity diagrams to document the process flow through use cases, and may also produce communication diagrams if it's important to work out which objects participate in which use cases in order to determine the classes. Finally, that work with communication diagrams feeds into the production of analysis class diagrams, and may also feed into the package diagrams, which show the structure of the classes in the system. The left-hand column of this diagram shows sets of diagrams that were produced in the previous slide. Let's look at the second column. If there are classes with significant state-dependent behaviour, you might produce some state machine diagrams. For most general-purpose systems, the number of state machine diagrams you'll need is low. You're likely to need more for real-time systems. At this stage, you might also produce sequence diagrams to model the interaction, either at class level or subsystem level. Sequence diagrams will help to decide about issues regarding concurrency and parallel processing. You may also use standard design patterns to influence the way that the interaction takes place in the system. Finally, on this slide, the earlier class and package diagrams will be updated to produce design class diagrams and more detailed package diagrams that reflect the work done on state-dependent behaviour and interaction. This last slide again shows diagrams produced in the previous slide on the left in the first column. The classes and packages will be used to determine the components of the system and their interfaces. These will be combined with information about concurrency to determine the deployment of the artifacts that manifest those components onto nodes in the deployment diagrams. You may use some of these diagrams more or less for some kinds of projects. For example, for projects that use service-oriented architecture, You may use component diagrams more to represent the services. For projects that rely heavily on business rules, you may use another notation such as the decision model, TDM, to define business rules. The key thing is that you tailor your modelling effort to the needs of your project. The next video is the last, and it wraps up the course with some information on where to find out more about UML and modelling tools.